I have 5 after, so we are going to officially kick it off. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Harvey Roach, and it is my pleasure to be hosting this Power Hour on communication, an essential skill for engineers. The Power Hour occurs the first Wednesday of every month at noon. So if you'd like to register for additional Power Hours, please go through the contacts that you use to get to this session. Or you can contact me directly at lisaharveyroach.com. There are many areas in communication that we could talk about, but today we are going to talk about 3 key learning objectives. They're going to be understanding why effective communication is essential, especially for engineers. We're going to talk about building rapport and also communicating under pressure, being composed and confident at all times. I want to know, do you believe this is true or false, these statements? So you could type in the chat, engineers are analytical and problem solvers. What do you think? True or false? Give me a T or F. True. Okay, everyone says true. Engineers are introverts. True or false? Most of them false. Eric says false. Okay. Engineers are more comfortable working with systems than with people. Sheila says usually. Margarita says true. And Eric says true. Engineers don't communicate well. True or false? False. We just have to listen well. Some, they have difficulty communicating with lay people. Right. So what do all of these statements have in common? Actually, they're stereotyping a little bit, right? We're putting engineers in a box, but these are the beliefs that a lot of people have about engineers. So I'm here to say that it doesn't have to be true, and some of your answers already show that you agree too. It's not necessarily true, and it doesn't apply to all engineers. The fact that some people think that engineers don't communicate well is not necessarily true, and I want to talk about that today because you can be an effective communicator if you are intentional about your desire to connect with others. So we're going to talk about that today. I want to give you a little bit of background about myself. I love helping people achieve their goals and reach their fullest potential. I currently have a business, Wisdom Consulting, and I've been doing training and consulting in my company for the last 10 years. I've taught over 16,000 people all across the country. Before that, I worked in corporate America for 20 plus years, mostly in automotive and steel industries. My degrees are in materials engineering with a concentration in metallurgy, and I have a master's in management. I'm originally from New York City, and I currently live in Farmington Hills, Michigan. So that's a little bit about me. Let's move on to the good stuff. Why is effective communication essential? So why do you think? And because we have a smaller group, if you want to chime in and open your mic, feel free to do that. If not, continue to use the chat. But why is effective communication so essential? It's essential for everyone, right? But especially for engineers. So why do we think communication is essential? How does it help engineers when they're more effective in their communication? So you want to share in the chat or open your mic? They have difficulty communicating with lay people. Said that. Okay. Well, I'll share. It's important because engineers sometimes, because they are so analytical, they have the data. So Margarita says engineers need data and connect. So they need to connect with people, right? So a lot of times they have the data, they need to make sure they're making a connection. Also, if the engineers want to move up into management roles, they need to be able to communicate the goals and the vision to the whole team. What I've seen a lot, as I've trained in different organizations, is that people or engineers are often moved up because they have great technical skills, but they don't have those people skills that go along with that. And we all know that effective leaders are effective communicators. So those are some reasons why it is very important. Sheila says what they do is very detail oriented and need to receive and communicate details and precise information. Correct. And sometimes they have to watch the language that they're using because everyone doesn't use the same language. When communication is effective, it looks like this. It is clear and concise. You're able to get your point across to others. Your message is tailored to the audience. That is so key. And I learned that when I was in Visteon as a program manager, and I had to go through the gate reviews and give reports on the status of the projects. It was very important that I realized that my audience was the CEO and his staff. So I wasn't communicating with additional engineers. I needed to make sure I gave a big picture because that's what that audience needed to take in. When the communication is effective, you know how to say what you need to say and when you need to say it. Your intent is clear, whether in person or virtual, right? Right now, we're doing a lot of virtual communication. And so it's very important that we are more engaged sometimes, even more so. That's why, Eric, if you want to show your face, you can do that because that's more engagement. You're building that trust. But feel free to do what you're comfortable with right now. All right. Anyone want to chime in on that? Or you agree with what I'm sharing? Yeah. One issue with communication, as George Bernard Shaw says, is the single biggest problem is that in communication is the illusion that has taken place. A lot of times we think we've communicated clearly, but we really haven't. People don't understand everything we're saying. The words aren't making sense. Our body language maybe isn't matching. So it's really important that we're mindful of that. I want to walk into the section on building rapport. Building rapport is so key. So when you want to have an effective communication, when you want to be effective at communication, I should say, you have to start by building rapport. You can't just expect people to want to listen to you or to be engaged with you if you haven't built rapport. So that is really key. And at the bottom of this slide, I share 3 areas that you need to work on to build rapport. You need to be present. So when you're communicating with someone, whether it's in person or virtually, you need to make sure you're fully present, not multitasking. And that's very easy to do, especially now that a lot of us are home or working from home. Doing a lot of Zoom calls, it's very easy to multitask. But we all probably have heard that multitasking is a myth because you really can't do 2 things well and be focused on the one thing that really needs your attention. So I can't really, type an email and then also be on the phone and have both of those things go well. In fact, I had one person in the class, she shared with me that she was typing an email and the person came into her office and said, I need to spend a minute with you. And she said, sure, go ahead, I'm listening. And she's typing on her computer. Well, does that other person feel heard? Not at all, right? So she's typing, she says, yeah, I'm listening. And she said she sent an email to the customer and it said, she said, I hope you enjoy the products I sent you, and I hope you no longer have problems with constipation. And the guy read the letter, the email, and he said, love the products, and I don't have a problem with constipation. So what happened? She was distracted, mistyped, and constipation's a word. So that's why we have to watch our written word as well, because spell check doesn't check the context, it just checked the spelling. So that was not a real professional image to put across, right? So you want to make sure that you're fully present and engaged when you're communicating with someone. Give them that respect and that focused attention. Next thing I have here is be mindful of your words. Words are powerful. Words have meaning. And so it's very important that you watch the words you say. Don't take it lightly. I know sometimes there's a difference between the way men communicate and women communicate. Again, not to stereotype, but oftentimes maybe women are a little bit more sensitive. So I've seen meetings where maybe a guy will say, oh, you're a jerk. That'll never work. And then after the meeting, he says, you still on for lunch, Brad? Okay, yeah. Whereas a woman would be like, oh, remember, I'm a jerk. my ideas don't work. You want to have lunch with me? I don't think so. Right? So sometimes we have to watch that. And again, that's not with all women or not with all men, but just be mindful that words are powerful and they do have meaning. Your tone of voice. That's something else that's really important. If you're trying to build rapport, you have to watch that tone of voice. I know being from New York, people have a very, oftentimes have a more harsh tone. My brother in particular, right? A very strong, harsh tone, but he's just very direct. In organizations, I see a lot of people are very busy and focused. They need to be direct. Some engineers are that way. They're very direct, more specific. And so we have to watch that because you don't want to offend people by having a harsh tone of voice. Your body language is also very important. Now, you can have a whole course on body language, but in general, there's certain things that people perceive about your body. So if your arms are closed like this, crossed, you see crossed arms, it may indicate that you're resistant or you're not open. So watch your body language, have more open body language and more focused eye contact. Let's just look a little bit more at body language. It can say a lot of things: resistance, interest, impatience. You're tapping your foot, tapping your fingers. Fear shows up in your face, same with surprise. The key thing to remember also about body language, just like other things I've been talking about, you can't stereotype everyone because everyone doesn't respond the same way. So I might expect someone to want to show interest by smiling or being excited, where someone else might be more reserved, right? So an engineer might, hey, great, I'm getting a promotion, I deserve it. And they're not maybe looking so excited as someone else might. So be mindful of body language, be mindful of how you're coming across and what you're portraying, but also know that everyone doesn't use the same exact body language. Are there any questions? Ha ha, agree, okay. Yeah.
I,
Let's look at, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I know that this class is specific to engineers, but it really works for a lot of technical people. And I'm talking specifically about like website developers and programmers and
Mhm.
things like that. Um, I was a project manager for a big, website development. And
Mhm.
I kind of had to be the liaison between the customer and the programmers because the language that they spoke, the customer didn't understand, and vice versa. So I was kind of the intermediary between those two
Right.
groups.
Yeah, you're right. This works for other people in STEM businesses as well as people who are non-technical, right? Communication is a skill that everyone needs to work on for sure. But thank you for sharing that. And we're going to look at more of that in my sender receiver model. Just a little bit more in listening. When we talk about communication, oftentimes people think right away that it's speaking. It's not just about speaking. A big part of it is listening. As I think Margarita shared earlier, that engineers aren't necessarily poor communicators, they just need to listen better. And I think that's a big part of it. Right now, people are so busy, and so a lot of times they don't take the time to listen, and people need to do more of that. They need to listen and be in touch. So this is a little mind map. So the center section shows you that the theme is good listening skills, and at the 1 o'clock position we have opening the door for effective communication. It means making the other person comfortable, right? Ask them, what's on your mind? What's bothering you? How can I help? You're inviting them in to share with you. So this is really good. And then listen. A lot of times we have conflict with people because we don't listen. People want to be heard. So it's really important to listen effectively. And then remain silent sometimes, listening to understand what the other person is saying. You know that I think it's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey, right? He says people listen with the intent to reply rather than to really understand. So we need to listen with the intent to understand rather than reply. So you can signal, nod, understand, show that you have empathy for what the person is going through. You may not agree with it, but imagine yourself, okay, if I was in your shoes, I might feel the same way. Be encouraging. Sometimes just nodding. I've been in meetings where, and this is when we could go out and be in meetings more so, where people aren't giving that feedback and others are viewing it as, okay, do I need to keep explaining myself because I'm not seeing the feedback? So as an engineer, you want to make sure that you show that empathy, you show that you're being encouraging, you really want to hear and understand what their issues are and listen. Active listening, that means clarifying and confirming. Paraphrase, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You want to show that interest in the other person. This is all part of building rapport. And then I already talked about being fully attentive, using open posture. Eye contact is really important. Again, in our culture, some cultures view it as maybe a sign of respect to lower your eyes. So that's a whole nother topic though. Have a friendly face. You don't have to be smiling like a hyena, but just, notice what your neutral face is. Sometimes people have furrowed eyebrows or downturned mouths, and they come across as not being engaged. So just be mindful of that. And you can change it up a little bit. Just raise your eyebrows to show some interest. That just changes the features a little bit so people know you are engaged. Leaning forward. That's body language that tells people you're engaged, you're listening. So things like that are really important. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Do you think you're a good listener? Type in the chat for me, yes or no, a Y or an N. Margarita says yes. Eric says yes. Sheila says yes. Oh, Sheila, did you say yes? Excuse me. I'm much better than I used to be. Okay, great.
Lisa,
A
I had a
little.
quick
Yeah, go
question.
ahead, Eric.
So I think one of the challenges because of this new remote world, right, is when you don't have that face-to-face contact with people, it seems really challenging to connect and to get a sense of whether people are really being attentive or not. Are there any tips like around that as to how we can be better or be able to engage better sort of in
That's
this remote world?
that's a great question, Eric. And that's what I was sharing a little earlier. I was suggesting that when we're communicating remotely, maybe just like you set, I don't know if you used to set meeting rules, but sometimes organizations would set meeting rules. The meeting rules that you get the group together and you brainstorm what are the meeting rules. So in the past, maybe the meeting rules were no use of phones while we're in the meeting. Everyone stays focused, no talking over each other. With the virtual world, maybe we need to do the same thing and get with the group and say, you know what? I know everyone's probably zoomed out, right? It's a lot to be focused constantly on Zoom, but can we set some meeting rules to make the meetings go better? And in that brainstorming, perhaps you would say, let's agree to open our cameras up, at least for the first 10 minutes, even to just say hi, share what we're doing or something like that. I think making it part of a meeting rule to say, let's just to have more engagement and better communication so we can get the full message, because that's a big part of it, right? We don't understand oftentimes what the intent is behind the communication. So it makes it harder if you can't see my face, right? So if I have my camera off and I said, I'm happy to be here, you wouldn't know for sure. You can kind of sense in my tone and maybe I'm not, but if you see my face, you say, hey, I'm happy to be here. You know I mean it. So I suggest that you would share. Let's have some meeting rules, and one of the rules is that we open our cameras and at least for the first 10 minutes and say hi, and or also maybe when you're sharing your points on your portion of the agenda, you open the camera up. So what do you think about that? Would that be something that you could do, Eric?
Yeah, no, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that sounds like a good suggestion. Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else want to chime in? Anything that you have done that has helped?
This is Sheila. For me, I like to use certain opportunities just like you're using right now, where you're asking people for feedback and engagement throughout, whatever you're doing, if it's a meeting or if it's a training, asking people to put things in the chat, asking people to chime in verbally, and that way that they're staying engaged, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Thank you. All right. Let's move on to the sender-receiver model. This you'll see in all communications classes, sender-receiver model. So you have the sender who's thinking about how to send the message, what to send, and then sending it over to the receiver. And then that receiver is encoding it, thinking about, okay, how do I interpret what was said, and then sending their answer response back. So that's the message. The message can be sent a number of ways, which is through the medium. At the bottom, I have the medium as a method of sending the information. So it can be, the spoken word, the written word. So it's spoken is face-to-face on Zoom, right? Written word can be books, emails. I'm not going to get into emails, but emails are something that we all need to work on as well when we're communicating, but that's in another session. And then clothing. That's a form of communication, right? How I present myself is a form of communication. Think of not to get into politics, but the Make America Great hats. That's a form. People are communicating something. Black Lives Matter. People are communicating something. So we're always communicating, even if we're not saying something, how we dress, how we come across. So just be mindful of that too. So think about, how do you want to come across? What impression do you want to make? When you're talking or communicating with people, something to keep in mind is there's noise. So you have this noise. So when you're communicating, some of the things that get in the way of people hearing what you're saying. Before I go into that, whose responsibility is it to make sure the message is heard properly? The sender or the receiver? What do you think? In the chat, sender. Margarita says sender. Shaler, sender. Eric says both. Sure. So ideally, the sender really needs to be responsible for making sure that message is heard by asking, clarifying, confirming questions. But if the receiver is engaged, they will want to understand the message. So they will ask clarifying and confirming questions. So then it would be both. But initially, you want to make sure as a sender, you're sending the message clearly. So what gets in the way? Thought patterns. Maybe people aren't thinking about what you're talking about. So as engineers, if you're talking to someone that's not technical, maybe they don't want to hear all about these different systems or models or computer gigabytes or whatever it is you're talking about. So their thought pattern is different. The interest is not there. Sometimes there's different cultures that you have to be mindful of. When we as Americans think of talking to someone from a different country, we think they have an accent. Right? We never think we have the accent. So we have to be mindful of that and say sometimes, I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat that? Or could you slow down, please? I want to make sure I get what you're saying. So please slow down. Your standards of communicating or how you feel someone should come across, preferences, technical jargon. Do you have technical jargon in your industry, Eric? And Sheila and
Oh yeah,
Margarita. Yeah, right?
definitely. Yeah, for sure.
So if you use an acronym, not everyone's familiar with that acronym. And then things change also. So a good thing to do, especially with acronyms, I know a lot of companies will have a directory where people can go and look up the acronym so they know what it is, because that gets in the way of communication also. And then personality. We're not going to cover the personality types in this session, but personality is a big one, right? That gets in the way of communicating. Sometimes we just don't like a person. You don't know why, but you don't. There's something about them that maybe rubs you the wrong way, and that can get in the way. So you have to be mindful about all of that when you're communicating and also when you're communicating with someone else. So do you agree? Is there anything else that gets in the way of communicating that you can think or that you have experienced? Pretty much covers the bulk of it, I think, right? Yeah. So just be mindful. This is typically how we communicate. You always have to be thinking, am I connecting? Because that's the key. You really want to be connecting. There's a book by John C. Maxwell. He has great books on everything, and it's called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. And I like that. Everyone communicates, but few connect. And he uses the analogy of when you're on the phone, if you get a drop call, how do you feel? So how do you feel when you get a drop call? Just put in the chat. How do you feel if your call drops? Margarita. She says depends. It depends on who it was, I guess, right? She might be relieved. But typically, you're frustrated. Yeah, Sheila and Eric's is frustrated. So typically, you're frustrated when your call drops because you're not communicating, you're not connecting. So he says, think about communication like that. You want to connect. You don't want people to be frustrated because they didn't understand what you were saying and they walk away with, I don't know what that guy or that lady was talking about. So connection is key. You really want to do that. I want to share with you an article that was written by the questioning engineer. And I put the bulk of the information for these three sections on because I thought it was so good. So he said 3 must-haves when talking to non-technical people. So think about your audience. And the author is saying to ask them if they need some background. If you're communicating technical information, not everyone is familiar with that. I know when I work with engineers, and they had their drawings and their designs and they had all of these specifications and, I want to make sure I understood what, even though I am an engineer, designing wasn't my field. So I want to make sure I understood, what are these symbols here? What does this mean? So ask people if they have a background. Someone could have assumed that, well, you're an engineer, surely you understand everything on this drawing, right? But maybe I didn't. So I like that idea of asking people, do you have a background in this technology or what I'm going to share with you? And then if they do, then you don't have to baby them. You don't want to be condescending. So I like that suggestion. The second was use visuals where possible or metaphors or analogies. So I just use an analogy. uh, Drop communication is like dropping, or not connecting is like when you have a dropped call, right? So that's very important to use those metaphors or analogies. And the author was saying that the brain can't digest all the information when they're unfamiliar words. I remember growing up, I would maybe come home and have a word that I learned in grade school or something, and my mom would say, don't use those elephant words on me. What she was saying is not that she was an unintelligent woman. She's very intelligent, but she was sharing with me at a very young age, don't try to look like you're superior. Connect with me, communicate. You can enlighten me about what that word means, but don't try to use it to make me feel, less than. And I think that's really important too. And the third thing the author says is repetition is if the concept is complex. So sometimes it's a very complex idea. You as an engineer know what you're talking about, but when you're trying to relate it to someone who is non-technical, maybe you need to explain it again. And different ways, mix it up, find different ways to explain it, but make sure they understand, check for that understanding, right? Um, are they nodding? Do they really mean it? I remember I was working with an engineer once and I said, are you in agreement with the way we're proceeding with this project? And he said, yes. I was like, what are you? Because he said yes, but he was shaking his head no. So you have to check all of that. Make sure you're looking at the nonverbal, listening to what they're saying as well, and then making sure if you see some signs of maybe a disconnect, go in and ask, share with me what you think in your words, what I'm trying to share with you. So I really like those things. Anyone else want to chime in? Do you think these are good suggestions for engineers to do when communicating with non-technical people? Yes, no? Great for everyone. Okay, yeah, absolutely, says Sheila. Great for everyone, says Margarita. Eric, did you think it was helpful? Good suggestions. Yeah, I thought so. So I want to share that. All right, here's a question for you. If you had a magic wand, what would you change to improve communication at your job, at your facility, in your work? So just give me one thing you would change. If you had a magic wand, what would you change to improve communication? So just type in the chat what you would change. kindness. All right. Margarita says kindness. Yeah, people need to be kinder. And especially now, right? We are in such a tumultuous time. There's a lot going on. We have the social injustice, elections, just a lot. COVID. So there's a lot going on. So yes, kindness would be great. Anyone else want to share? What would you change to improve? Sometimes it's the systems you're using. Sometimes it's maybe it could be having one-on-ones with your manager to make sure you're connecting and understanding their goals and requirements. Sheila says, I would like people to not be so sensitive, but that might be my communication style. Yeah, right? So sometimes people are. Now, the thing about that, I say too, is just be mindful that people aren't using that, right, to try to get away with stuff. I think sometimes people can, you know, pretend to be a little sensitive to get things that they want. And then sometimes it's not. They just are sensitive. And people are the way they are for various reasons. That's another topic, right? Why are people the way they are? The role models they've seen growing up, the feedback they've gotten over the course of their life, the times that they grew up in, all of those things affect how people are and how, why they might be sensitive or bully. Eric says regular communication more often. Yeah, sometimes we need that. We need that to clarify, confirm. Let's make sure we're on the same page. Let's connect once a week. Maybe there are different types of meetings you can have. There's a book by, uh, I think it's Patrick Lencioni. It's called Death by Meeting. And he talks about the different types of meetings. And one of the meetings is a stand-up meeting where just the first 5 minutes of the day, now we won't have this now if you're not working in a facility with people around you, but the first 5 minutes, it could be on the Zoom call. Let's just go around and say, what are your issues today? What are you working on? That would be another way to engage people, Eric, right? The first 5 minutes, what is your hot issue today? That kind of thing. And just go around quickly. And so everyone has an understanding on what's going on. All right. Okay, let's go on to the next section, which is communicating under pressure. So especially now, I've mentioned about COVID. People are stressed at home. They have to homeschool. Eric, do you have any children you have to homeschool? Or are you the cook in the house? Or do you have any of those pressures? Regular commission, no, but it would be tough. Yeah, right. What about Margarita or Sheila? Anyone, you know? No homeschooling, right? I don't think either. Well, I don't know. Sheila, are you? Homeschooling grandgirls. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's different, right? No kids, but still have to keep up. Right. So there's a lot going on now, especially when you're working from home that can create stress, tension, pressure. So when you're feeling that pressure, what I want you to do is just to take a deep breath. So if you're caught off guard, if someone says, how come you didn't do that? How come you didn't send me that data? How come you're not on top of this? Just take a deep breath, all right? Ask for clarification to confirm your understanding. Communicate assertively, not aggressively. Assertive communication is just standing up for your rights while respecting the rights of others, right? So you want to make sure that's how you're communicating, but don't get defensive. A lot of times we get defensive. Well, I'm busy too. Oh, I thought, don't do that because then you don't look like you're in control. So make sure you're communicating assertively, asking questions. Uh, Asking the right questions is really key. Learning to asking good questions is really key to effective communication also. And then practice your communication skills by attending Toastmasters. I'm a member of Toastmasters. I just received my Distinguished Toastmaster certification, so I'm a DTM, and it has really helped me with feeling more confident, also practicing when I need to present information. So if you go to toastmasters.org, it's an excellent organization to help you with your communication skills. I want to share a few communication pitfalls to avoid. So we want to communicate confidently and clearly as an engineer and as in general, right? So what are some pitfalls you want to avoid? Emotions. You don't want to get emotional. Now, you might say engineers typically are, because they're more analytical, they may not be as emotional. But if you find that you are, the key thing is to focus on facts. And for others who are that way, you could share with them if they get emotional. You know, Q-tip is an acronym I like, which says quit taking it personally. Sometimes people, back to your point, Sheila, are so sensitive they take everything personally. Sometimes it has nothing to do with them. You might be walking by in a room and don't say good morning to that person, and they're thinking, oh, she doesn't like me. No, you just focused on what you have to do the next, that day. And that sometimes can be an issue if people are too sensitive. So don't take things too personally, and separate fact from the story. A lot of times we make up a story in our head, oh, they didn't invite me to the party, they must not like. No, that's not really it. Maybe they didn't think you were part of the team yet. So just be mindful that emotions can get in the way. Biases, right? We all have biases, and unconscious bias is a big topic now that we're talking about. We all have biases, and that's okay. The key thing is that you can change your reactions to the way that you see things. You can get information, seek information out for yourself. So maybe you grew up being told certain things. You don't have to keep that same belief. You can seek out information for yourself. So watch those biases. So what are some, so we know biases against, black, white, male, female, or some biases. What are some other biases that people have? Want to type in the chat or open your mic and share? What are some other biases people have? Could be with children, right? Sometimes I know Sheila and I were talking about this the other day, that there's biases against women who have children. There was a episode on 60 Minutes saying that women were getting fired because the kids were coming on the Zoom and they heard the kids crying. So managers were saying that they weren't effective. And so that's a bias because people have kids. Margarita says accents, size, right? Whether you're tall or short, degrees. Sometimes there's that, right? Whether you're married or single. I had a lady in a class tell me she was an engineer, and she worked with engineers, and they respected her, they worked well. But when she got divorced, she said they treated me like a loose woman. All of a sudden, it was just like her status diminished. So that was very interesting. Age, whether you're too young. Eric's age, too young or too old. Sure, there are biases. There's perceptions that, oh, well, if you're older or a baby boomer, maybe you don't know technology or you're not open to change. But that doesn't have to be true. If you have grandchildren or children or nieces or nephews that you want to stay in touch with, technology. So we have to watch all of our biases, just be aware of them. So when we're talking to someone, just be aware of how you're coming to the conversation. Are you coming with those biases? Are you setting it up? Because people will see that before you start talking. They'll see if you have an open demeanor, and whether even on Zoom. So your face, that's why it's good to open the camera up so that we can see each other, right? But they'll see that, your intent. All right, fears, that can cause communication pitfalls. As an engineer, you might be uncomfortable talking to your engineering manager asking for more time for a project. But you have to think about, I like the acronym FEARS, false evidence appearing real. So a lot of times we make up things in our head, we think something's going to happen, but it's really not. And we spend a lot of time worrying and agonizing about it, and it's never going to happen. So I say, ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? So I speak up to my boss and say, I really need more time on this project, maybe because I didn't get the information I needed from the customer. What's the worst that can happen? The manager might say, that's too bad, we don't have more time. Keep moving. Well, then you have to do what you have to do. But don't be afraid to push through it. I know when I joined my project management group, PMI, group here in the Great Lakes chapter, I didn't know anyone. So when I came to the meeting, they're initially standing outside in the hall, just waiting for the room to open up to have dinner. And I remember I didn't know anyone, so I looked around, I said, I didn't see anyone I knew, so I sat down. And I had to tell myself, Lisa, get up and talk, mingle, right? And I said, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. when I get inside and have dinner. I said, Lisa, get up and talk. Now, I am saying this to myself, not out loud, so I didn't look like a crazy person, but I had to push past that fear. Do you know what I had a fear of? Anyone want to put in the chat what they thought I was fearful of? Anyone guess? There's a new group of project managers and engineers that I didn't know, and rather than going up and talking to them, I chose to sit back. Any idea what my fear was? Rejection. Yeah, not fitting in, Margarita. Yeah. Rejection. They didn't know me. So why would they want to talk to me? I later realized that I wasn't thinking very well of myself if I was having that feeling, right? Because I should have been confident to say, hey, I'm a really interesting person. They would be happy to know me, So I thought about that later. But I did eventually push through. I did get up and I went, I looked for a group that I thought was friendly and I said, I'm new. Do you mind if I join your group? They said, come on in. And by pushing past that fear, you know what happened? They introduced me to people that I didn't know that I wanted to meet because I knew what committee I wanted to work on. I got to sit at dinner, have dinner with them. And then I got very involved in the chapter right away. And now I actually write a communications and leadership article for the chapter for their monthly newsletter. So push past the fear. Trigger words. This is a communication pitfall. Don't use them and don't get rattled if others use them on you. When I started out in engineering and I worked for U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh as an engineering associate, a management associate it was called. And I remember the guys weren't, used to having women. They were older white men, and they treated me more like a daughter than a coworker. And they would say, so dear, how are you doing today? How's it going? I just hated the word dear. It just irked me, right? And so I didn't know how to say at the time, just call me Lisa. So instead, I just, had this thing about that word. It was a trigger word. So much so that if I went into the grocery store and the lady said, here's your change, dear, it'd be like, don't say that, So you have to realize that people have trigger words and sometimes they don't mean those. The gentlemen that were saying the word dear didn't mean to be offensive. They weren't trying to be. They were trying to be engaging. So sometimes people are not trying to be negative or offensive, and sometimes they don't know. And that's where more of that communicating and helping people understand goes in. And then don't you use words that will rattle people. Don't say, well, you're not an engineer, so you wouldn't understand. That's not very nice, right? So make sure you don't do things like that. And then gossip. Gossip's a pitfall you don't want to fall into. Don't participate in it. Remind people that there are other things we all need to do, right? So those are some things that you want to shy away from so that you can have effective communication. Are there any other pitfalls that you want to share? Those are like the main ones, but anything else you've noticed that you have to be mindful of? Not seeing anything just yet? All right. So I want to wrap up with sharing with you a summary of what we talked about a little bit. Tools you can use. So I like mind mapping for brainstorming and getting things out of my head and onto paper. So this is a mind map of communicating effectively, communicating like a pro. So you see my main thought is in the center, communicating like a pro. And then the first branch I have, when you're communicating, think of the structure and the content. So how are you communicating? Are you communicating first face to face? Are you communicating virtually? Are you communicating by email? Because the structure of your content and your message is different. If you're communicating by email, you can write a lengthy note. Actually, I wouldn't encourage a lengthy note. I'd encourage information. You could provide more information using bullet points and a lot of clear space, but that's different from when you're communicating face to face or via Zoom. Your voice, you want to make sure you're not monotone when you're communicating. People don't like people who are, just droning on. And then again, we talked about body language. Watch your body language and your eye contact. People like you to look them in the eye. Your facial expressions, if you don't know how you're looking, maybe record yourself to see how you look when you're listening to someone or you're talking to someone. And gestures, just be mindful of gestures you're making so that you're communicating appropriately. I did a a talk for my mom's church, and it was my church at the time, years ago, and it was for Black History Month. And when I got done, my aunt said, "I really enjoyed your talk on Black history, but you were doing something with your eyes that was really weird." So I didn't know that. But had I had recorded myself and checked to see how I was coming across, I would have been more effective. Oh, I would have been more effective. That's my reminder not to go over. All right, and active listening, we talked about that. It's really important that you listen. I think that is probably one of the key things. You know, there is, she's a talk show host. I can't remember her name right now, but she said listening may be the sincerest form of flattery, because when you listen and people are heard, they really appreciate that. When you're communicating, if you have to give a project presentation, you might be nervous. So how do you eliminate nerves? How would you get over your nerves? What do you say? Someone share in the chat. What do you do to eliminate nerves? If you have to give a presentation, I know when I had to give my project reviews, it was a little nerve-wracking. You're going in front of the CEO, talking about whether or not you're on budget and whether or not you're meeting the specifications, and if you're going to be on time. Practice, practice, practice. Yes, that's what Sheila says. When you practice, you know your stuff, you don't have to worry about it, right? You don't have to refer to notes. Use the nerves as excitement to connect folks with your message. Okay. So, you know, you're excited, that's why you're a little nervous, right? So just use that to engage the audience, right? I also think of saying things in advance to yourself. I can do this. I'm capable. I'm competent. I'm confident. I know my stuff, and I'm open to communicating effectively. So I think that's really key. Anyone else want to share any additional things that you do for nerves? I was teaching a group of nurses, and they told me that if you eat a ripe banana, it has tryptophan in it and it would calm you down. So I thought that was interesting. I said that would give me gas, so that wouldn't be good for me. But, there are different things you can do. I don't recommend drinking or pills, but just practice, know your stuff. That's the best way to communicate. Anything else? All right, so let's go on. There are so many things we could cover in communication. So additional topics would be communicating with virtual teams. And that's what Eric, hinted at earlier. We didn't dive deep into all the ways that we can communicate, but that's another topic for discussion. Virtual teams, how do we interact with them? How do we engage with them? How do we make sure we're connecting? Communicating with different cultures. There's a high context, low context, things like that that are uh, unique to different cultures. Different generations, that's a big topic, right? How do you communicate with that boomer or that millennial, that Gen Z or that Gen Y, right? And I just recently saw that there might be a new term coming on after the Gen Z, which is the Alpha. Has anyone else heard about the next generation being named as Alpha? And they would be 10 and under. No, okay. Yeah, so I think that's interesting. There was talk that you might not even see generational naming anymore, because really what separated the generations was often the technology that was used. And now because technology changes so quickly, people are keeping up and there's not that huge separation anymore. Are there any questions? Any questions that I can answer? Oh, okay, so I have a few more things that we can talk about later. Is communicating with different personalities, right? So different personalities play a big role in how effectively we communicate, and then communicating with difficult people. People are often not difficult; they're just different. And once we understand the differences, then we can communicate with them effectively. So I encourage you to to sign up for the next monthly Power Hour. And again, to do so, just connect with the person that gave you the instructions how to get to this one, or you can contact me directly if you're interested in seeing the full presentation, our 8-hour presentation on communication. Please let us know. We'd be happy to do so. Or if you're interested in anything else, we'd love to be able to work with you and your organization. Thank you for spending time with me today. It has been my honor and pleasure to share this Power Hour with you and this time with you. And if you have no more questions, we can conclude this session. Are there any more questions? Eric, are you all set?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay, great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you got some information and some insights out of it. Margarita, you're all set? Yes? Oh, and Sheila, thank you. Okay, well, thank you all. Again, it's my pleasure. It has been my pleasure to share this Power Hour with you, and I look forward to sharing more information with you in the future.